Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben from Brightly. I'm here with Ian, about to present on the strategic asset management and how it works for communities. Just a few housekeeping rules, sorry. So everyone will be muted the entire time. If questions are raised throughout, please use the Q&A feature down below, and we will address those towards the end. There will be an on-demand version, and slides will be made available on request. So just on our host, Ian, on the next slide, please. So Ian is originally from the UK. He is the founder and CEO of IC Infrastructure. He has a background in engineering and business consulting, focusing on Lean and Six Sigma techniques in various industries, including local government, water, wastewater. His background, so he joined CH2M and Jacobs asset management team 2012, where he was focused on asset management work for infrastructure clients in the US and Canada. He specifically worked an investment manager for FCM for the asset management program, and the global manager for training for CH2E management training course. So his company works in the public infrastructure. He sits on the ISO 55000 global committee, was on the CNAM board of directors from 2014 2017, as program manager for the CNAM's New to AM program from 2017 to 2021. Most recently, the Michigan Infrastructure Council to be the asset management champion program on behalf of the state. And he is passionate about boosting the awareness in the industry. So Ian,
nice. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, great to be here with everyone today. Really appreciate this opportunity to come talk to you guys all about asset management for communities. So what we're going to go through, we've got a few slides here. What is asset management? Around how we've got here and why this is such a hot topic now. Benefits to you and your community, some of the benefits that you'll see at the different levels in terms of, me as an individual, us as an organization, and the impact to your community. Then I want to take you through some kind of tangible bits to get started on, and some real kind of easy steps that you can take to start going down this road of formalizing your asset management efforts. And then there will be time at the end for Q&A here. Okay, so what is asset management and why now? Why is this all of a sudden this big buzzword that everyone's talking about? So let's jump into this. So as a community infrastructure owner, you are responsible for a lot of assets, a lot of different kinds of assets, different types of infrastructure. And fundamentally, like, these infrastructure assets exist to deliver some sort of service, some sort of quality of life to your community. And that is often understated, underestimated, misunderstood. This is really about community services. This is about services that our residents and our communities are really dependent on, often for very basic essentials and quality of life, but just general day-to-day well-being. This whole idea around like using assets to deliver value and deliver services really underpins a lot around what we talk about in this new world of asset management. And that's been a shift, over the decades of just really focused on assets and maintenance. And we'll talk more about that later. And the kind of new world of asset management is really being value focused and thinking about what are the services that we're delivering to our communities. But when I talk about communities here, I mean communities in a very broad sense. So yes, towns and cities, we can have regional communities, regional governments, lots and lots of different, small communities as well, First Nations, and indigenous ideas. We've got infrastructure assets that we're using to deliver some sort of services. But it also can apply to some other kind of slightly nuanced communities as well. You think about a university campus or an army base. those are effectively mini communities. You know, they're responsible for systems, the buildings, all within these the bounds of these communities. So great to have such a broad spectrum of people here on the call today. Yeah, do want you to have that kind of broad definition of communities in your head as we're talking through things. But really, yeah, keep focused on this idea that we have assets, but fundamentally those assets exist for a very important reason for us delivering services to our communities. Now, when we talk about an asset, what is the definition of an asset? So this is the definition from ISO. An asset is an item, thing, or entity that has potential or actual value to an organization. So when we talk about, you know, what is that value, and as we said just before, it's about us delivering services. What are the assets that we need as an organization to deliver those services? That definition of an asset is very, very broad. So yes, it includes our physical infrastructure, things that we built, pipes under the ground, buildings above the ground, all this physical infrastructure that we've got. But that definition, you know, what do we need as an organization to deliver that value? That includes a lot of other things as well. People, knowledge, data, our systems. Like, there's so many other things that we need to deliver value as an organization. And again, it comes back to that kind of ability to have that bigger picture of, you know, what do we actually need to deliver that value? And yes, our physical assets are one part of it, but how do we get this overall kind of machine in the organization working together to deliver all the different parts of this together? Now, something that's been really interesting in the industry over the last kind of 10 years is this evolution towards thinking around natural assets as well. So if you think about, you know, your services that you're delivering, be it, and the easiest one to get your head around is, you know, your water service, so delivering clean drinking water, or your storm systems, those services are massively reliant on assets. You know, what is our lake and our reservoir like? What is our aquifer like? What are our drainage ditches and our rivers and things like? Because those are very important assets to us delivering our services. And that's something that is very big for organizations, kind of looking at their services holistically and the assets that they need. So there's been this big push to integrate natural assets into some programs too. So a good resource for anyone that's interested in that is the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative. So we'll share a link to that in the chat for anyone that's interested in more detail. What I would say to you though is, you know, particularly those of you that are early in your journey, don't worry about that. You know, definitely get your hands on your core infrastructure first, and then kind of longer term, you can look to introduce natural assets into your programs as well. Okay, so, you know, let's look at assets kind of bigger. When we think about the state of our infrastructure and the state of our physical assets, things aren't good. You know, a bit of a short story. It's not a pretty picture. You know, the Canadian Infrastructure Report Card gets released, as does the US Infrastructure Report Card, and both of them paint a pretty bleak picture of where we're at when the state of our infrastructure and the condition of our infrastructure. Now, some sort of service. Now, for me, you know, the fact that we have some assets in poor condition and some assets in very poor condition, so what? Big deal. The real problem here is that those assets are directly tied to our ability to deliver services to our communities, real quality of life, very important services. Now, those assets that are in poor condition or that are old, they represent a higher risk of failure. Now, when those assets fail, your services are going to be affected. That is the problem. Not just the problem that we have old assets. Yeah, so what? It's that those old assets will impact our services. Now, they could impact our way. You know, we might have to shut the rec center or the library for a few hours if there's a problem with something, but it could be some more catastrophic failure. You know, it could be a bridge collapsing somewhere. It could be a roof caving in at one of your facilities. The spectrum of risks that you're exposed to as those assets get older gets more and more severe. So that's the real problem here, is that we have assets that are in old condition, but that is the real drive impacting services for our community. So yeah, that's the real challenge here. And as I said, like, there's a lot of assets in really poor condition. There's also a lot of assets in fair condition. Now that's concerning because over the next 10 years, those fair condition assets are going to get bumped down into poor and very poor condition, further impacting the risk to service if we don't do something about it. So, we're in a relatively big hole, and how do we start getting ourselves out of that? So this isn't something that you've done, right? I think that's something that's really important to get your head around, like especially as we're starting to talk about with communities and things like that. Like, this isn't something that, you've joined this org for 3 years and it's like, well, why are things in such places? This has been decades in the making. Now, if you look at the Canada side of things, we'll talk more about the US as well. What we saw in North America was this infrastructure boom in the 60s, basically after the war, baby boom, populations coming in, cities really starting to lay their foundations, building out the highways, the water infrastructure, kind of big concrete assets are going in around the place, all went in around the 60s. Now, most concrete assets have a lifespan of 50, 60, 70 years. So what we're seeing is all those assets that were built back then are now coming to the end of its life now, or, in the last kind of 10, 20 years. But the problem's been compounded because we basically had this period of high spending on infrastructure, and then we went through economic issues in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and we massively pulled back on our infrastructure spending. Now, the US graph for this looks very similar. So what this graph's showing us is what we call capital intensity. Now, it's a very economic measure. It's the percentage of our gross domestic product that we are spending on infrastructure. Now, it's not a perfect measure, but it's actually a pretty good way at trying to gauge where a country is at in terms of their infrastructure spending at a kind of high economic level. Now, what we see here is that, high period around that kind of high 4s and into the 5% of the 60s. When you look at, well, what should this number be? The estimate is that a country should be spending around 3.8% of their GDP on infrastructure just to stand still, right? So not for things to get worse, for us to kind of be maintaining where we're at. We should send. Now, for every year that we're under that, that basically represents a lot of maintenance and, not creating new assets. So what we're seeing here is that, there's a high period, 30 years where we're pushing back our maintenance. And as we push back a lot of these big capital maintenance items, those things get more expensive to do. So, you look at a road and resurfacing a road, a minor patch repair in a road is relatively inexpensive compared to a complete rebuild of the road. So, as we're pushing back a lot of these interventions and these replacements, we're seeing the average age of infrastructure increase, and it's not being looked after. So, we're kind of in this position now, all these assets that are coming to the end of their life or are at the end of their life now, and many of them haven't been looked after properly. So that's a big problem. Now, when you look at some of the other countries that are out there, a lot of developing countries are spending a significant more, almost double this, into the kind of 7 and 8% of their GDP on infrastructure. Now, this gets really interesting from a kind of policy and a government level around the economic benefits of infrastructure spending. Now, I don't want to spend too much time going down this rabbit hole, but I think there are a few important things to highlight here. Short term, infrastructure spending has a massive stimulus on job creation and supply chain. So a lot of governments are using infrastructure spending as a way to stimulate things coming out of the pandemic and looking to increase our spending. But when I talked about infrastructure being really important to the quality of life and the services around communities, there's this longer term benefit that is felt for decades, when we build these assets and have a higher infrastructure quality rating around our community services. So there's this longer term benefit as well to the communities. And that's where a lot of the governments are really incentivized to be pumping money into infrastructure right now. Yes, we've got this hole that we need to get out of, but that also creates short-term benefits for the economy and also has longer-term benefits for the community services as well. Now, when you look at the US, as I said, it's a parallel story. We've been underinvesting in infrastructure for decades, and this is really starting to impact businesses, families, and the overall economy. We need to correct this course that we're on. And that's really why we're starting to see this big push our infrastructure, but asset management is a way at helping us make sure we are articulating what we need so that the money is going in the right place. And that's why there's this kind of parallel push for, spending money, but also spending it in the right places. And asset management is the way to make sure that we are clearly articulating our needs and are able to capitalize on some of this funding that's coming out. So, I'd love to say that this is just a problem around old infrastructure, but unfortunately for all of us, the problem's worse than that, and it's being compounded by a number of other factors. A number of communities are facing population change, so high growth causes a big problem for infrastructure owners. It works with a number of cities and regional districts where, we're seeing very, very high growth, and we're having to pull pipes out of the ground that are only 30, 40 years old. That's a big expense for us as infrastructure owners, but also population decrease causes big problems for a lot of the rural communities in terms of how a lot of the infrastructure is funded, how it's used, and that's a big problem for some places. Climate issues as well. So I'm not here to debate whether or not you think we are causing climate change or not, but when you look at the number of adverse weather events that we are experiencing, a number of insurance claims and things like that, they're a lot higher than they ever were before. And the climate changes are impacting infrastructures in a really very significant way. Heat waves in the summer, fires, lots of floods, but also population changes temperature changes in the winter, more freeze-thaw cycles, some lower temperatures as well. So all that causes problems with infrastructure too. Funding, very, very big challenges around the funding model for public infrastructure. How much money actually makes it down to the local level versus the regional level, the federal level, and the mechanisms that we have in place for setting rates. It's very challenging for a lot of public infrastructure owners. Community expectations. So this is a big one. So many cities and residents want higher and higher level of service, yet they want to pay less in taxes. And it's a very, very difficult conversation to have when we don't have the data and information to back up those discussions. And that's a big, big thing that asset management can help with. Aging infrastructure. So yeah, as I mentioned, this is a big problem for a lot of places. One that we've seen evolve and emerge very kind of before the pandemic, there was a lot of staffing problems around retirement waves and people with a lot of knowledge kind of heading out the organization. But since COVID, we're seeing this kind of big shape up in the staffing world right now. Very high turnover rates, very difficult to get senior staff in positions. Big challenge for a lot of public infrastructure owners. And yeah, on top of all that, we're still dealing with a lot of the impacts from COVID, supply chain issues, staffing issues are around kind of availability and sickness waves that are coming in, like lots and lots of impacts that we're experiencing. So, unfortunately, there is a lot of problems that we're trying to deal with as infrastructure owners. Some might be some other ones there for you that I've not covered there, but yeah, just kind of take that moment to think about what are the big things that are impacting us as a community and that are really causing you problems from an infrastructure and service perspective. To tell you that this is easy. This is hard. You've got a lot of different challenges that are facing you, and we want to be trying to make steps to move forward and help make some of those difficult decisions a little bit easier. Where asset management comes in. So here's the definition of asset management that we use that's very appropriate for communities. You'll see different different definitions out there, but we found this one's really good. This was actually one that we developed when I was part of the Leadership in Asset Management program a number of years ago. Go to that in the chat as well for you to access. We got together 12 towns and cities, and we had conversations with them around best practice asset management for communities. And we developed this handbook on asset management, particularly in the policy and strategy side of things. So handy resource there as a collective. Asset management is an integrated approach involving all organization departments to effectively manage existing and new assets to deliver services to customers. So again, this is about delivering services. This is about looking after both our existing assets, but also decisions around our new assets. If you're just focused on your existing stuff, you're not thinking about growth, you're not thinking about upgrades, but also if you're just thinking about the growth side of things, you don't want to be forgetting around your old assets that are deteriorating. So we've got to try and find that balance there. And it is an integrating approach involving all departments. You cannot do this alone effectively within one department in your organization. This is not just an engineering thing. This is not just a public works thing. This is not just a finance thing. We have to be working together across the organization. The intent is to maximize benefits, reduce risk, and provide a satisfactory levels of service to the community in a sustainable manner, providing that optimum balance. And we're going to talk more about that balance later. Good asset management practices are fundamental to us being sustainable as a community. Are we making decisions now that are going to allow us to exist long into the future for the next generation and the generation after that? Because when you're talking about infrastructure having a 50+ year lifespan, those decisions that we're making on infrastructure today have a huge impact to the organization on a whole number of fronts. Now, as we'll start to talk through some of this, it can feel pretty overwhelming, right? It can feel like there's a lot of different things that you need to be doing, things that we're not doing. But what I want you to remember is already doing bits of this in your organization. You already have some sort of budgeting and financial process. You already have some sort of maintenance process in place. You already have some engineering practices in place. What we're trying to do is better connect those things together around the organization. And that in itself has a lot of benefits. And there might be some gaps that you can fill, but collectively, as a group, you can prioritize those and start to pick off the ones that you want to do and plan those into the longer term. So we'll talk more about roadmaps later. So let's just go through some of the benefits here to the communities. Now, asset management, again, really helps you articulate your needs. It helps you better understand your assets, helps you better understand what you need to do to those assets, and ultimately gives everyone a better understanding of where we're at. What do we own? What condition is it in? What do we need to be spending money on over their ability to deliver services? And that's a big benefit through this is needs to the community and your stakeholders to be able to say, hey, this is what it truly costs us to deliver these things. And that gives them a better understanding of where the money goes and a much better appreciation of the community services that they're getting. Because for many of us, our municipal and our community services represent, but yet you want to put my taxes up a couple of percent, I'm absolutely not dead against it. That's the typical response that you see from a lot of citizens. Yet you want to put my Netflix bill up 10%, sure, that's okay. People don't have what they're getting, and this is a big pain point for a lot of places. And again, asset management helps you clearly articulate those. Okay, so yeah, better appreciation service management as well, and better trust their experience through asset management. So here's a poll that we want to run for you as well. So talking about that whole, are we sustainable? So we're going to run this, and I want you to think about, do we have the right the right rates, the right fees coming into our organization for us to be sustainable? And by that, I mean, can you afford everything that you need to do to deliver those services, both now and into the future? So a couple of options for you here: yes, no, or we don't know. Okay, so we've got that running there. You take a second to fill that out. Not a trick question. This is something that we ask on all of our training courses that we run. Do you have the right rates or revenues, however you're funded? Do we have the right revenues coming in? So yes, pretty sure that we do. No, pretty sure that we don't. And then, yeah, we just don't know. We're unsure. So once we see a kind of critical mass coming in there, we will share the results from that. Okay, so thanks for sharing that. So yeah, this is interesting. When I run this course, and we run this, say we run it at a conference, and there's 50, 100+ people in a working session. We might have a couple of people kind of sheepishly put their hand up and say, yeah, I think we've got enough rates coming in. Most people say, no, we don't. And then there's still a good portion of people that are no, we just don't know. We just don't have the data and information one way or another to say whether we are or not sustainable. Now, asset management will help you answer that question as a yes or a no thing. And from there, you can start to have really good conversation prepared to fund these things. How do we want to change the level of service delivering? So thanks for answering that. Pushing on here. So yeah, benefits to your organization. It's going to give you a better way to line up with if you're setting our long-term community plans. There's the council plans, the business plans that are getting developed. Lining up our infrastructure and our services with those goals are going to make those happen a lot more effectively. It's going to help us find the right balance for our organization in terms of service cost. And it's going to help us answer that question around, hey, like, do we have sustainable rates, yes or no, going into the organization? It's going to help departments work better together. And it's going to give us a clear list of shovel-ready or shovel-worthy projects. And we're going to talk more about that next. So here's a quote from a councillor from a small town up in asset management has helped them get ready for major funding announcements. Got this wave of funding coming from the feds, both the White House and the federal government in Canada, big injection around infrastructure. They're able to respond very quickly to those grant requests because we know what projects we need to be doing. And all that the grants do is that project that we were due to do in year 5, we have a clear understanding of why we need to do it. We can bring that forward. Incoming councillors and staff have a solid knowledge of where asset management, where the municipality stands with its assets, financial strategy that we need to put in place to maintain and replace those assets into the long term. So real good, again, way of sharing that knowledge and information with their community to help people understand where we're at. Now, just want to have a quick pass through some of these big puzzle pieces in asset management. So we're not going to get into these in any kind of deep detail, but just with this kind of broad topic of asset management. If you're interested in reach out to me or Ben, and we're happy to look at doing some additional things. But yeah, I just want to chat through these 6 main puzzle pieces when it comes to asset management. So people and leadership. Staff are absolutely critical to your asset management journey. Yes, like software systems play a really good role in helping manage and move the data and information around. But when you look at the scope of asset management as a discipline, there are so many different parts of the organization that have talking. You've got all the engineering side, you've got the urban side, you've got your operations and maintenance work, you've got the finance work that's going on. Like, there's so many different things happening as an organization. And good asset management organizations are able to pull those different groups together and get people talking, get people sharing and coming up with collective decisions and collective processes around how we are moving forward with our infrastructure and our services. So really being that middle pin in the organization. Now, from a policy perspective, this is where you start to put in place some of the kind of management systems and term community plan, your council objectives, wherever it would be. We've then got our asset management policy. Now, the policy is a policy of principles, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's something that we can, but there's a lot more in this within that leadership and asset management that we shared in the chat. So the asset management policy helps set the direction for how we want to be behaving when it comes to asset management. Doesn't get into the details. It just lays those signposts for some high-level principles that we want to be following. We want to be thinking about long-term costs. We want to be making risk-based decisions. We want to be customer-focused. These high-level principles help guide the direction of your program and what you're going to be doing and focusing on. Your asset management strategy helps take those principles and turn it into actions, turn it into mechanics and processes within your organization. How do we make these principles happen? What are the systems that we need? What are the processes that we need? What are the people that we need to really make this machine work? How do we make decisions when it comes to our infrastructure and our services? Big part of that is around governance. So who's involved in the organization in making this happen, and how do we make sure those relationships and those channels are in place? Then you've got your asset management plans, and that's where we start to talk about okay, like what do we need to do to our assets to deliver these services? What's it going to cost us? What do we need to do strategically around our maintenance? So lots and lots of things there in our assets, and then that translates into the actual day-to-day operations and work that we do on our assets. And now altogether, they need to be lined up, and that line of sight is something that we talk a lot about in the industry. So our principles should be enabling and in the same direction as our vision for the community. Our strategy is then based on those principles, and then our asset management plans and the way that we intervene with our assets and our services is in line with what we're setting in our strategy, which is in line with our policy and in line with where we're heading as an organization. Yeah, so good quote here from City of Windsor, who are also a client with Brightly. The policy has been a great tool that they've been able to reference back to. So they're taking their asset requirements and their renewal and their spending requirements back to council to say, hey, like for us to maintain these services, like this is what it's going to cost us. And then, when there's resistance and there's all these discussions around, well, like, why are we doing this? And it's like, well, this is what we've agreed to in the policy and the direction that we're heading in. And so having everyone standing behind the policy is a good step in that journey. If you're interested in more information on policies, you can head over to our website. We've got a recording there that you can access, asset management policies. We'll share a link to that in the chat too. Data and information, so lots and lots of things under data and information. You guys are going to have lots of different data organization, and it can be pretty overwhelming to get your head around what data we have, what data we don't have, what sits in, and there's different types of data out there. So yes, you've got your asset data, what do we own, where is it, what condition is it in, but you've also got some service data. How do we know that those assets and those services are performing the way that we want to system? And then your financial data, where does your life cycle cost data sit? How does that get connected to your financial reporting that you need to do, your budgeting softwares? There's lots of different things in there. I know this is something that Ben can chat to you at length about in terms of like how this is structured, but lots of things there to think about in terms of what data we have, what systems it is in, and how those all connect and how we can use that information to make better. Want to just head over for a quick video here for people to understand as they're getting into their asset management.
We see a lot of infrastructure owners struggling to articulate to their customers and their stakeholders what it costs to deliver services. So this is something that we've been working on through a number of the some of these messages around the services. So this is a graph that we draw up for everybody. So on this side you have services, and this is the service level that you're trying to some sort of service. There's a connection and system of assets that you're working with, but that's ultimately the value that we're delivering as an organization. Now, over time, we created that, but your assets start to deteriorate over time, and as a result, your service. Now, if you're not spending any money on maintaining your service and looking after your assets, maintaining the tanks, and it starts to tank very quickly. And for organizations that aren't spending any money on their maintenance activities, things get out of hand and they look bad really, really quickly. So for anyone that's been part of an organization like that, you can attest to how quickly. But if you're not spending enough money on your maintenance, service still starts to do. We need to be making sure that we are spending enough money on maintaining our existing service, looking after our existing money that we need to spend on our infrastructure assets just to maintain that existing level of service, spending money just to stand still. Now, for a lot of communities, a lot of customers, a lot of people that you're serving through your infrastructure, they can be expecting a higher level of service. But it's important to know that that's for, and it's not what you're originally funded that service for. the cost of delivering that higher level than just maintaining, and it's different. We are talking about to deliver this service. Often these higher levels of service come with adding new assets, more assets. Increase in service comes with an increase in cost. And have we talked about with them in terms of whether they're actually willing to pay for that or not, rather than trying to absorb it within our existing budgets, which are only designed to fund this existing asset that we had? Are we spending enough money on our assets just to stand still, and articulately have enough money to be funding these services and maintaining these assets long into the future? And through talking with our customers, do they want a higher level of service, and are they willing to pay for it?
Nice.
If you're
well, so something that a number of our clients have asked to share with your staff. So no problem there. We'll share that. A lot of that service focused mindset that we want to delivery side of things. Obviously, you need to be doing things to your asset. This managing assets part of asset management. So acquiring our assets, and we can have a whole discussion around free assets. A developer gives them to you associated with that, but that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down. You obviously operate, either a big renewal and that you're kind of getting rid of an old pipe and replacing it with a new one, but there is a disposal element that's often understood. So we need to be thinking about the whole cost of that. What are the different considerations around that cost of that asset? And that's something, again, software is very, very powerful in helping us with. True cost of service. So, asset management really helps us understand that, we need to start the discussions with our ratepayers and our elected officials around the true cost of asset ownership, what it costs us to run these systems. And from there, we can start to have these conversations around what is the level of service that we want and expect as communities, and what are sustainable rates that we need to set to make that happen. So that's a great quote there from Chicken Infrastructure Council program. So yeah, really, really important there to be able to understand and articulate the true cost of your services. Asset management, it helps you understand that balance. What is the right balance for you of maintaining our old assets, building new assets, and upgrade level of service that we talked about. Now, over a period of time, your capital investment software and models can help you flatten that out. But that split of what is the right split for you is going to be unique to your organization. You all have your own growth targets, your own level of service expectations. So we want to be thinking about what that looks like for us. And again, like starting to look at your budgets and that kind of three-tiered, that three classification is really powerful. So, through this asset management world, you start to get that better understanding of what does it cost us to look after this and deliver these services long into the future. Then you can start to have these really powerful conversations around how do we fund it? Do we need to go into reserves? Do we take debt on? What about our rates? What about the funding that's out there from the state and the feds? And what about the things that we don't fund? Things that we can't fund, how do we want to tackle those? So lots and lots of things to think about, and asset management helps bring all these things up to the surface for you to have more meaningful conversations about. So some tips for getting started here. Some guides to formalizing asset management in your organization. This is a handy booklet that we published years ago, the what, why, and how of asset management for your community. So this is a kind of easy read for staff, for management, for elected officials. So you can head over to the CNAM website and download that. And it covers a lot of things, including some steps to move forward in your organization. Someone needs to be a champion and get people talking about it. You have to build a network, and we could again talk more about the importance of a steering committee and why that's such a valuable part in your journey. Understand where you're currently at, and then look at where you want to go in your future journey. So that 4-step process. Now, in terms of step 3, I just want to get into that in a little bit more detail here. A gap assessment is a really powerful process for you to go through. And I encourage you to do that with the steering committee that you want to set up. So get that cross-representation from around the organization, get around the table with engineering, with finance, with public works, with planning, and start to have these conversations around where are we? Because there'll be things that you're doing that you know that you were doing, and there'll be things that you might think that you're doing that you're not doing. So that gap assessment process is really useful. A couple of free tools out there that you can use. The FCM Asset Management Readiness Scale, that's the foundation of a lot of the grant funding that's out there from FCM on asset management programs. And then for the US, we actually Americanized that asset management readiness scale as part of the Michigan Infrastructure Council's program. So you can head over to there, and there's an Excel tool that you can download that helps you plot where you want to go and generate some useful graphs that you can use as part of your communication efforts. With that tool, you can then start to look at where do we want to go. Okay, so we understand where we're at. We can then start thinking about where do we want to go? What are our future goals? And be mindful that you don't need to do all this at once. What is that longer term roadmap, and what are the goals that we really want to achieve in the short term based on our resourcing constraints? And what are some of the goals that we can push back that are still important, but they're not as burning an issue as some of the other problems that we want to be addressing? And on that, this doesn't happen overnight. Okay, asset management is not a 3-month project, then we're done and forget about it. It's a shift in a lot of ways in organizations, particularly around the way we make decisions and the way we do planning and the way we pull all the information together from across the organization. And all that happens is as we get further on in our journey, we get more advanced at making those decisions. And we start to pull better information, make more efficient and effective decisions around. Now, when you look at the changes that you're going to make in your organization as part of these improvements, some of them are pretty significant, particularly if we're talking about a software implementation. So I would encourage you guys to look at your roadmap over a 5-year period. What are the things that we want to be doing over the next 5 years to advance our asset management practices, and set some targets, be realistic around what you can and can't do, because everybody has resource constraints, funding constraints, capacity constraints. So what do we want to be doing in the short, medium, and long term? And getting buy-in from your leadership team is really, really important around this, particularly when we're looking at investments in training and competency planning. Big part of that. Your steering committee can then stand as the the check-in for this, and having regular touch points with your steering committee to say, okay, here's where we're at with the roadmap, here's what's working well, what's not working well. So yeah, the roadmaps are a really powerful thing to go through as part of that getting started journey. Key takeaways. So I just want to play this last video for you, and then we'll jump into the questions here. Pull this up over here. There we go.
Hi, I'm Lisa, the mayor of my town. The role of my council is to ensure that residents are provided with services that are essential to our quality of life, like clean drinking water and sanitation, transportation, parks and recreation services. Our community's infrastructure assets are critical to deliver these services. Today, like in many Canadian communities, 1/3 of my town's assets are in poor condition, in part because most of our assets were built in the 50s and 60s and are reaching the end of their useful life. At the same time, our community has grown, and so has the demand for new and improved to upgrade our assets to comply with new environmental and safety standards. We made investment decisions based on our ability to finance the upfront development costs. However, the bigger ongoing costs to operate, maintain, and eventually replace these assets were not fully built into the analysis. Plus, our assets are vulnerable. Climate change has resulted in impacts from more severe storms, flooding, and other unexpected events. Our assets were not designed with these impacts in mind. For example, one of our roads was washed out during last spring's flood, and we had to reprioritize and redirect money in response. Now we're caught in a cycle where new infrastructure is needed to service growth that has been spread. Residents count on us to deliver exceptional services. We need to catch up on overdue maintenance of existing assets and to finance the replacements of our old ones. We strive to keep taxes and fees low. However, the revenue we collect to manage all this isn't keeping pace with it all. So my council has been faced with some tough decisions. Do we adjust tax rates? Do we delay maintenance and repairs even longer and risk the consequences? How much should we place annually in a reserve fund? Do we reduce the level of services? Do we delay new projects? So what are we doing? We're engaging in asset management planning to be more strategic about how we manage our assets and spending. We're reviewing our assets across all departments in a holistic and integrated way. We're evaluating the full life cycle costs of different capital assets and land use decisions to ensure we're choosing the best for the community. To become more resilient to a changing climate, we're developing a climate adaptation plan and starting to identify how we can become less dependent on fossil fuels. We now recognize the value of the services our natural assets provide, like managing stormwater and improving water quality. We're also speaking to residents about the cost of seas. All this work is helping us to coordinate our infrastructure work and so we have an ongoing process in place that is proactive and allows us now to make better informed and strategic decisions. We're now much better placed to support my town's economy, and our residents' quality of life stays central to achieving these goals. Do some of my town's challenges seem familiar to you?
Nice. So, yeah, a little bit cheesy in places, but a pretty good way at capturing some of those messages that we've said. And that's just a few minute long video. I've seen a number of communities use that for their communications. So, you know, playing that for your staff, playing that for your leadership team, showing it at a council meeting, just a handy little way things that we've talked through. So yeah, a couple of key takeaways. You know, we'd really encourage you to come together across your organization. Again, this isn't just a department, you have to be talking together. So get those people together around the table, start thinking around where are we now, you know, use one of those gap assessment tools that's out there, and then start to think about, okay, what are some tangible steps that we want to take kind of short, medium, and long term over the next 5 years. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us here. As we mentioned at the start, there will be a recording of this available for you. And if anyone would like a copy of the slides, please just email me, and happy to share a copy of those. But yeah, really appreciate your time. And we've got some time here for questions just now. So as we mentioned before, if you put your questions in that Q&A box, we'll pick them up. Yeah, I'll hand over to Ben.
Thank you very much for your time today, Ian. We'll just jump into a few questions that have come through, and if any others pop up, please continue to send them through the Q&A. Question was, I've heard a lot about asset management plans. How do they fit into an organization?
Nice. Yeah, asset management plans come up quite a lot in your asset management journeys. Now, you know, for me, the asset management plan is a communication tool. It's a document that really helps us articulate where are our assets at now, you know, what do we own, what are they worth, what condition are they in, and how do they tie to our services in as much detail as we can articulate our levels of service. And from there, you can start to have that conversation around, here's what it's going to cost us to fund these things. here's the life cycle costs and the cost of looking after these assets over the next 10, 20 plus years. And how are we in a position to fund those around our assets and our services? Very much from that kind of like bottom up, like here's what's happening side of things. When you get into your asset management strategy and your asset management policy, that is kind of setting the direction for where you want to be heading, but it doesn't into those nuts and bolts around what are we actually doing to our assets. That's what the asset management plan does. Now, for many organizations, like that process of writing the asset management plan is very powerful because it helps you understand what data we have and what data we don't have. Now, the big bit of advice I would give to everyone on their asset management plans is don't let a lack of data stop you from trying to write one. So it's okay to just say, hey, we've got this data, we don't have that data, and just report on what you currently have, as well as an understanding of how confident you are in some of that data. So we've seen a lot of people produce asset management plans that have kind of data confidence ratings. So it's like, yeah, hey, we've got this kind of list of our assets and what condition we think it's in, but we want to do a bit more digging and improve the quality of that data. But here's what the current data is telling us. That's an important part of the journey for people. So yeah, the asset management plans, really think about them as a communications tool, less about a kind of detailed engineering study and more about, how are we presenting this information in a way that stakeholders can understand about our assets and our services.
Cool. Thanks for that, Ian. And I suppose just to jump on that is it will evolve over time as well. So it's not a set in the forget. You want to over time and take, if you have, like Ian said, if you have lack information today in your plan, is go out and collect information to inform your plan in the future. So you don't want to build it and then leave it on the shelf. You want to continually update it and review it.
Totally. Yeah. And like those, as I said, those difficult decisions that you have to make in your assets, they just become a little bit easier when you see that right information come up to the surface. And, you might not have that information this year, but go and do condition assessments and start building out some of your data indexes. Like that will make that decision a bit easier in a few years' time.
Cool. I've got another one here. What areas do organizations typically struggle with on their journey?
Yeah, so there's a few kind of hurdles that people get into. A big one right at the start of a lot of journeys is leadership buy-in and getting your senior leadership team to support this, because there's a whole other heap of challenges that they're dealing with and fires that they're trying to sort out within the organization. So leadership buy-in is a problem in some places. Now, what I would say to you is that needs to be a priority to getting that on side and finding that executive champion, that sponsor who can really kind of stand behind the program and really kind of give you support at that leadership level. Without that, with the best will in the world, like asset management programs will stall out because there will be some competing priorities that come in. So making sure that the leadership team is bought into this is really important. Some steps towards that, that process of awareness building and training with the leadership team is really important. Having them involved in the policy, they understand these principles that we want to be standing behind as an organization and why. So that the training helps them understand the benefits and really helps them understand how it's going to help them in their job and help the organization and everyone move forward and meet the bigger picture objectives. But also it helps us kind of understand what direction it is that we want to be taking and have that leadership team help shape that. From there, you start to have the conversations with them around your roadmap. So yes, we all understand the benefits, we understand the direction we're heading. As a committee, you're kind of shaping up that roadmap and what you want to be achieving in the short, medium, and long term over the next 5 years. Getting your leadership team behind that roadmap is that massive step in having them bought into your journey, and listen to them about their reservations and their challenges with that, and use that as a way to refine your roadmap. But that's a real, a definite hurdle that we see some organizations having. A little trick for you, if you are having trouble getting the public works director on side, trouble getting the engineering director on side, have a chat to finance. How does the financial budget get set? Because I bet that they're having problems getting the information that they need to help set budgets and rates in the long term. And asset management, as I mentioned, will help pull this information forward and make their information and their processes in finance a lot more effective. So yeah, handy little trick for you there if you're struggling with leadership buy-in.
Okay, thanks, Ian. One more question, just because we're nearly up on the hour. So I saw the program with Canada and Michigan, but I don't live in that state. What do you recommend I do to try and connect with my peers and talk about asset management more?
Nice, great question. Yeah, so you know, the networking side of the asset management industry is great, particularly in the public sector. So I used to do a lot of private work, now kind of fully focused on the public infrastructure owner side of things. And something that's really great in the industry is that people are very open to sharing and helping advance their own practices, as well as help others in the journey. So, you know, getting in touch with your peers and meeting people is really powerful. I know, you know, Ben and the Brightly crew, you guys do various user sessions and regional working groups. So that's a great way to meet other people that are on their asset management journey. There's other groups in the US, the likes of the Institute of Asset Management. I'm actually heading down to Denver next week for their conference, and that brings together asset managers from across North America. There's also the Asset Leadership Network, so that's a great way to meet people there. Canada, there's the Canadian Network of Asset Managers. Lots and lots of groups that are out there to help you kind of get introduced to people. From a training perspective, if anyone's interested in training, there's various different kind of training paths out there and routes that people can go down. Certainly, you know, we've got these various awareness building programs that we run, both for individuals to join, but also us to do private courses for specific organizations and come in and help get your staff and your steering committee going in the right direction, but also leadership team training and council training as well. So full suite of things out there, and we are looking at rolling out that program that we have in Michigan to other states as well.
All right. Thank you for your time today, Ian. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone that joins appreciative of you taking the time today. So thank you to yourself, and thanks everyone to joining today, and have a wonderful day.
Nice. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate your time.